time for this feedback forum, an opportunity to hear from you, our congregation. The reason we're doing this is our leadership team, leadership ministry team, in a lot of conversations has said we want to hear feedback from the congregation, particularly as we think about some of the collaborative things that we've been up to, but kind of also thinking about rolling forward. We want to hear from the congregation some thoughts, feedback, ideas, and so we are here to gather your input. The idea is not that LMT is going to make a big presentation here. We want to hear mostly from you, so we've got some open-ended questions. So as I mentioned earlier, there are Post-it notes that are on your tables. And feel free to use those Post-it notes. There are pens on your tables as well. You can jot down a phrase, a word, that sort of thing, if it helps you kind of remember. If you would rather pass those things to the front, we have this nice music stand that is conveniently here. You can come and stick things on the music stand rather than speaking out your responses to things. But thank you for being here and thank you for being in this time. And just as a word of prayer, I guess, to get us into this time, let's pray. God, we give you thanks for this gathering of people whose hearts, minds, whose time and energy are devoted to this congregation, House of Prayer in Richfield. And we give you thanks for opening our hearts and minds to what each person in this room has to offer and to say, the questions that we ask, and the responses that we provide. Thank you, God, for already having a plan forward for us and helping us to discern where you are leading us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, as a very high-level agenda, the idea is really going to be to ask some questions about collaborative ministry. What has gone well? What are some of the things that energize us about it, that we're excited about? Things that we want to celebrate. What are things that have maybe been some challenges? We'd love to hear challenges and kind of framing that from the realm of constructive. What can we do to overcome some of those challenges as well, or kind of framing those challenges in a way of, here's something that has been hard. And then kind of asking the question of all of us, where is God leading us? And where is that, what looks like faithful next steps as a congregation, particularly around collaboration, but also could be other areas that we see as well. Katie is here as our congregational president. She'll be taking some notes here for those of you that might be a little bit visual. So with our opening question of collaboration, what are some of the things that are energizing about collaboration? And if you want to raise your hands, and then I'll call and shout it out so that hopefully y'all can hear Gretchen.
I think for those of us who are in choir, it was wonderful to have a fuller choir. It energizes us every Sunday. So when it's just a few of us like we normally have when aren't collaborating with Woodley, we still love to sing. But when we're all together, it just makes it a whole lot.
Awesome. So the collaborative choir, as a choir member, being together with Woodlake has been a great experience, energizing. Still like to sing when they're separate, but recognize that that bigger choir has more voices, more parts, a little more support for each of the parts, and so awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Jill.
I especially am appreciating the new friends we have met. We've gotten to know so many of the people at Woodlake that we didn't hear, have any contact with. So it's great.
Meeting new friends, so new friends, building relationships with people at Woodlake. Sarah.
VBS the last couple of years, Vacation Bible School has been a joint effort. That's been a lot of fun to work with them.
Awesome. So Vacation Bible School, being involved with that joint effort, the opportunity. I think it's probably fair to say in some ways that if we did a VBS on our own at House of Prayer, It might not get off the ground, right? Same would possibly be true at Wood Lake. So this has been sort of the history of some of the things that have driven some of our collaborative ideas. And so recognizing when we do things together that there's some energy there. Lida, did you?
A fuller congregation in the pews.
Yeah, fuller congregation in the pews. So when we do collaborative worship opportunities, there's more people. And one of the things I will say that I've heard from people when they talk about sort of the life of House of Prayer, often there can be this lament of we used to have more people in the pews, and we miss that. We miss the energy that that brings. We miss the relationships and the people. So doing collaborative things has allowed us to have more people in the pews. Scott?
Rally.
Rally, the youth program. Another kind of similar to the Vacation Bible School piece, right? Where we might not on our own be able to do that, especially with the same energy, but we've been able to do some things. I'll just highlight, I know Rachel was here, is she still highlighting? Right? This is the problem, when you sit in the front row. I get the privilege of meeting with Rachel and Pastor Neil each week to talk about the things that are going on with Rally, and we try to put that out in newsletters and different e-news and those sorts of things. But just to see sort of the energy of those students together when they're gathered. But also we've been building some great relationships with the middle school through the Boys and Girls Club. And that has been a whole group of people who we don't necessarily see on Sunday mornings in either congregation. But Rachel and Pastor Neil in particular have been building relationships with those students. And as we go out into the community, as we go to events at the middle school, we see them at those events. Some of them have participated in things like the lock-in that we did in January, and so there's opportunities to engage. More hands. Pastor Corla.
It's fun hanging out with people who do the worship a little differently, I mean, I'm having fun with it.
Yeah. So
I like being reminded that even here in Richfield, Lutherans have a lot in common, and we don't do everything the same, and that can be good.
Yeah, so that reminder that, we can do things a little bit differently, and it's still Lutheran, whether it's here in Richfield or heaven forbid, we actually cross one of the highways around here. But yeah, great reminder, and it brings us life and opportunity. Kim?
More hands doing God's work.
Ooh, more hands doing God's work. So our outreach opportunities that we've done. And so one of the things we did in the last year was Feed My Starving Children, which was great. We had a good group of people who gathered there and did some things. Our packing event for
Many hands, many meal, or every meal.
every meal.
Yes.
Yeah. We did the Thrivent packing event for Veep. That was another one where some people from the wider community came and participated, and so, yeah, great, many hands. Lida, another item.
A fuller bell choir.
A fuller bell choir, right? So similar to Gretchen's comment, being able to, have bigger musical groups. Elaine, I see your hand.
An interesting insight to our gospel of the day. It seems that many people are more inspired by an active program in the preaching of the sermon, the gospel of the day.
So an active preaching inspires more people. And that's something that we've received through our collaboration. Thanks, Elaine.
Is it more people that inspire more active preaching?
All right. Full confession, right? As the person up in front, right? Is it more energizing to preach to a room of 100 people or 96, whatever we have in this room here today? Or is it more energizing to preach to 3? It's different, I will tell you that much. What else is energizing?
We haven't done a lot, but I think we can have an opportunity for more educational opportunities. We have two churches tomorrow.
Yeah, more educational opportunities, an opportunity to do that. And so in the fall, we did some fellowship group with some educational sort of piece to that. We've crossed over a couple of different opportunities that we have publicized from the different congregations, but also an invitation to doing more of that sort of thing. So educational opportunities. Carol.
Well, being a fairly new member of this church, I was impressed by the exchange when you would go over to Wood Lake and the pastor would come over here. I like the idea of the switching around, and you get different viewpoints on the same sermon.
Yeah, so the exchange of having different pastors in the space, and so particularly, yeah, when we exchanged and I preached the same sermon 2 weeks in a row. One time it was here, one time it was Wood Lake. Pastor Micah did the same thing. So the two churches get the same message, theoretically, but in their home spaces. Elaine, I saw your hand again.
I would like to see an exchange of more people at the Zoom Bible study meeting of the pastors. We have you and Pastor Corolla, but we never see the other people from the other church. Do they not have Bible study? And can we encourage them to come to our Bible study? Have we done that? Are we doing that?
That is a great invitation. So we have invited Wood Lake to join with our Bible study, our Tuesday Bible study that happens in person and on Zoom. We have not specifically invited the pastors from Wood Lake to be involved with that. That's a great question. I think the short answer to that is because there are certain things that we have continued to do as our two congregations that are sort of congregational events, right? So there are things that are house of prayer activities. There are things that are Wood Lake activities. But it sounds like what Elaine is inviting us into is more collaboration with some of those things that have been congregationally specific. And Bible study definitely feels like an opportunity where we could easily invite one of those pastors to come in for a week or on an alternating basis, or I don't know what it looks like. But there's some opportunity for imagination there. I will say we have had Wood Lake members who have popped in on it as they've heard about it. And so we have had that, but not also with great regularity. So, Cara.
Lent was great. I mean, having a meal together every week and having lots of hands to help make that happen, lots of people to eat the food, lots of people to participate in the worship and the learning aspect of Lent.
Yeah, so Lent, joint Lent, which we've been doing for how many years now? Anyone?
3.
At least 3. Andre's saying 3. We'll go with 3. One of the things, and so that means if we've been doing it for 3 years, I think I've been here for all 3 of those years. If I'm doing my math right. Yeah, me and math, we don't always get along. But one of the things that we noticed, particularly this year, is that the Lent season, if you talk to a lot of pastors, they will tell you Lent worship attendance starts high with Ash Wednesday, and then it just declines as spring comes around. We noticed, particularly this year, but also last year, that doing the collaborative Lent activities with the meal where we get to meet new friends and get to build new relationships, have some time of kind of getting to know what's going on in the life of our congregations a little bit, or have some teaching time and then have that worship time at the end. We consistently had in the 90s participation, so like 94-ish people I think was the average through all of the weeks of Lent. And so yes, it was still a little higher for Ash Wednesday, which we anticipate, But those continued Wednesdays, we did not have that kind of drop-off that is sometimes typical. And so the energy that we've built through that and the relationships we've built through that and the opportunity for education and so many things, Lent has been great. So Andre.
Our older youth, our high schoolers, got to participate in the national gathering in a more meaningful way with a larger group of youth and multiple churches. It was a great experience.
Yeah.
From what I heard, I wasn't there. I heard it was a great experience.
Well, I'm glad you heard that it was a great experience, since your son was one of the people who went. So Andre's lifting up the youth gathering this last summer, being able to go, and that's one where collaboration is a big picture collaboration. It's not just House of Prayer and Wood Lake, or House of Prayer, Wood Lake, and Oak Grove, Tapestry added, the Richfield churches. But we actually joined with Christ the King in Bloomington, Amazing Grace in West St. Paul, in Grove Heights, somewhere over there. And then Diamond Lake in South Minneapolis. So we had multiple congregations that came together to take our youth, a group of, I think it was about 20 of us, so there were 2 vans that went down to New Orleans. We had kind of a pre-event travel trip that stopped in Memphis on the way, built some great relationships. That was with our high schoolers. That has actually sort of spurred what we're now calling Second Sundays, which is our high school once a month gathering that Rachel and Lacey from Diamond Lake are primarily responsible for those relationships to continue. Funny story, I was at Costco a couple weeks ago, and I ran into Wendy, who was one of the adults who went on that trip with us, who's a member of Amazing Grace. And so I ran into her, and we were like, hey! And caught up on all the things that were going on in our congregations, and she was super excited to hear about the stuff happening in Raleigh. So, yeah. Jill?
You mentioned Tapestry.
Yeah.
And I really have enjoyed when we've had the service in Spanish and English. It's been wonderful. We've learned some great music and we've listened to some great messages. So.
Yeah, so the benefit of being able to gather with Tapestry, to have bilingual worship, and to hear messages from their pastor or pastor and deacon as well. So Pastor Melissa and Deacon Josue, as people who are great partners. I think just as kind of a word about Tapestry, they did not participate in our joint, what was the last joint thing we did where they would have? Maundy Thursday. Very intentionally, because as a community, they are cautious because they're a large immigrant population. And so they want to be cautious about the ways in which they protect the members of their community. And so that was a conscious decision that they made to not be involved with that. But we continue to be in dialogue with them and recognize there are some ways that we can support them, and there are things that we can be doing with Tapestry and the relationships that we've built. If anyone ever wants to learn even a little bit of Spanish, un poquito, it is great. I will say high praise about the Spanish and English classes that they offer. Just a great way, but again, kind of about building relationship as much as it is about learning some Spanish skills. And you also get a good meal out of the deal. Cara.
I appreciate being able to have opportunities for staff to collaborate more. Our communication staff, Mary at House of Prayer and Christy at Wood Lake, are working together to do a joint newsletter. We've been working on kind of combined communications for the last several months so that we're communicating the same things when we need to. We've been able to kind of use some custodial and like boiler maintenance opportunities when our guys are gone or their guys are gone. We kind of share staff that way. Wood Lake has been without an administrator for the last number of months, and I've been helping them out with job descriptions and hiring and copier things and other administrative tasks that they do in the office. So there's lots of opportunities, and we've been trying to use those, in addition to rally and music.
The short summary of that is collaborative staff opportunities with Wood Lake. If you want more details, see Carl. Elaine.
How can we incorporate the other churches in Richfield, Woodlight, Oak Grove, into the VEEP program that we sponsor every summer? In giving away food from VEEP. We do not have enough workers from House of Prayer, nor do we have any workers from Wood Lake or Oak Grove. How can we improve our program to encourage other churches to join us?
That's a great question. I'm going to put a pin in that for just a second because that sort of transitions us beautifully into the challenges section. So I'm going to hold on to that for just a second. I kind of get the sense that we've hit an awful lot of the good things, but I want to just give a last shout, and then we'll come right back to that question. Yeah, Sarah.
Have one, the summer worship.
Summer worship at Veterans Park.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, that's another collaborative opportunity. And in fact, this year we've invited Richfield Lutheran to be a part of that. They have a new pastor who's on board. Charlie Rudd is their pastor. And he has told us that they want to connect, they feel a little more connected to Richfield than they do South Minneapolis. And that they have historically done their own worship at Veterans Park. And so he was excited that we invited them into that. So yeah, another great celebration piece. Katie, were there any other things that we thought of in our previous conversations?
I think we hit them all. I have some notes, but that.
I think that hits.
I think that hits all of them.
A lot of the highlights. So we'll use that as sort of that transition point, since Elaine brought it up, into kind of what's next. And if there's stuff that you wrote down on your Post-it notes that you're thinking it might be helpful to have somewhere, but I don't want to say that, or it doesn't need to get added now, feel free to bring that up and we'll add those at a later time too. But I want to transition us toward this question of what have some of the challenges of collaboration been? And so Elaine brings up a great point. So we've been doing food distribution at Seasons Park Apartments for a couple of years. And one of the challenges that we have faced in that is that we don't necessarily always have enough volunteers, but we also have not been able, or maybe haven't extended the olive branch to invite Oak Grove or Wood Lake into those specific events. And so that's a challenge that we have, and I think kind of a little broader is to say that there are various opportunities, either outreach opportunities, or even as Gretchen kind of alluded to initially with our choir, with our music and choir handbells was brought up, there are opportunities we have to invite other people into the things that we're doing. And that's a challenge because historically, churches have sort of tried to stand on their own in their own corners of communities. And they've said, well, we do our things, we invite our people, and then if we can't get it done, then we either don't do it anymore, or we, try to figure out something else. And so I think the great challenge is how do we invite others into these opportunities that are so life-giving. And I will say that doing the food distribution at Seasons Park Apartments is such a great opportunity. It's so well received by the people who get the food. It's an opportunity for VEEP to kind of connect with the community in a broader way. It's an opportunity for us to be face-to-face with neighbors who are not necessarily going to come into our church building. And so there's a lot of good things. And so that's a great question. Elaine, did you want to say more?
A 97-year-old person can volunteer their time as old as I am, and I have done so for the entire distribution of these food. Have I not? Yes. So you and anyone who is 15 or older, I'm sure, anyone from Raleigh, anyone, help these poor people who show up every time beef is talked about.
Yeah, and Lane, yeah, absolutely. Lane's been a great ambassador to sit there and to greet people, check them in on the list, so there's a variety of tasks in that event, so thank you for that. Dick?
Diamond Lake is the parent church to House of Prayer.
Yeah, so back in the day, Diamond Lake planted this church in Richfield, has a relationship, so there's a congregational relationship there that could be tapped. And so to that point, we've done some youth stuff. What might it look like to rekindle some conversation there and think about kind of some broader opportunity? That's a great point. Pastor Corla.
This is a pretty big umbrella of kind of challenge, but I'm hearing a little bit of it in what Elaine is saying and some of these others. Our muscle memory doesn't quite have collaboration in it in all of the places yet, right? We're still working with maybe an older muscle memory, because I can think of a number of really cool ministries that Woodlake has, similar to Veep and our Bible study, that we've been invited to, but that I don't think a ton of House of Prayer folks show up at regularly, right? Their Matt service is one of them that comes to mind. And so in some ways, I think there's a challenge that comes out of not having quite developed this muscle memory at all the parts of our ministry life yet. It's an opportunity as well to start building some new ways of relating to each other. But yeah, I think it's worth noting that there are also ways in which we have been invited and just haven't developed that muscle memory quite yet, in the same way that with our Bible studies and with our Veep. Other folks have not developed that muscle memory either. But we have the chance.
So the challenge of, Woodlake and other places inviting us into opportunities. I like that muscle memory sort of metaphor, right? Because there are certain things we do automatically, right? We get up in the morning and there are automatic things that we do. If you're a coffee drinker, you put the coffee on at some point, right? If you're not a coffee drinker, you get as far away from the coffee machine as possible so that those that need it get there. But yeah, what's our muscle memory of activities that we feel drawn into? And so the example of the Matins service on Wednesday mornings at, I think it's 8:30. I know, and that's another one where I know we've been invited a couple of times into leadership with that, but it's an opportunity for us, as kind of a way to connect with our collaboration partners around the community. Other challenges that maybe have come to mind, or things that you've noticed as we've done collaborative ministry, maybe not even just in the last year or two, but maybe the last year or two. Yeah.
I've heard from several people that we sang at House of Prayer a lot more than, at Woodlake, more than we sang here in our congregation misfest. So it's a great opportunity for the church to have hired the cantor.
Yeah, so one of the challenges was there was at least a perception of the choir being at Woodlake more than House of Prayer. I have not gone back to statistically figure that out. I know Rosalind was worked very hard at trying to balance that. Part of the reality to that for House of Prayer is that we were used to having the choir here almost every week, and so not having a choir here on the weeks that the choir was at Woodlake certainly felt missed, but as Jill lifted up, it was an opportunity for us to hire a cantor, and so we've been blessed with Anna in the 9:30 service to be able to lead worship in that way, and we'll continue that through the summer. We'll probably add another voice to that kind of cantor role, because we recognize that for one person to be available every Sunday through the summer may be a challenge. And so it's an opportunity again for us because one of the challenges was we were recognizing we missed vocal leadership in worship. And so that was a challenge that kind of became revealed. I think another challenge kind of related to that was in Rosalind's role where she was sharing time with Wood Lake and House of Prayer. She recognized that that was not a sustainable model for a staff position. And so before she left, we had a lot of conversation about what could it look like to create a sustainable staff position in that director of liturgical music, liturgical worship role, so that we're not burning somebody out in that role or expecting too much of somebody from what we're kind of setting in front of them. And that was a learning opportunity that came up because we were willing to do some collaborative things across the road or down the road. Other challenges. Gretchen.
You know, I love the collaboration thing, but my heart really is here. And I don't know how the rest of you feel, but it's hard for me to think about giving up this space. So I think I have to work on that personally. And maybe some of you do as well, I don't know. I don't feel as comfortable, I have to admit this, over there worshiping as I do here. I love worshiping here. So, there you have it.
Yeah. So the challenge of being comfortable in this space, this is the place where, just kind of looking across the crowd here, many of you have worshiped in this space for at least a couple of years, if not a couple of decades, many of you. Recognizing there are some newer faces to the crowd here, including your two pastors. But recognizing that, yeah, that's a challenge, right? We feel comfortable here. We don't feel as comfortable when we worship down the street. And as Gretchen lifted up, that's something, it's an opportunity within ourselves to work on that, but it's also, I think, important to name that and to say, you know, this is a hurdle in front of us. How do we name that? And how do we work with that? What do we do about that? Yeah, Nancy.
Can I just add one thing on that subject?
Sure.
If we had more people, like if we're worshiping at Wood Lake, if we had more House of Prayer people there, we might feel more comfortable. And I don't know if Wood Lake comes to our services because they have more people, so it's hard to know, and I don't know the number.
Yeah. So Nancy's highlighting one of the challenges being that when we worship at Wood Lake, less House of Prayer people are going over there, right? And so it's an opportunity that potentially, if more people joined us in that space, right? If the familiar faces were there among the new friends, it might start to feel a little more comfortable to us. But yeah, that's also a reality that there are some people who worship in this building and do not worship in other churches, right? And so that's something we've discovered and learned as we have done collaborative opportunities. Other challenges, Sarah?
Still on worship services. The 11 o'clock contemporary worship, in my opinion, hasn't combined at all.
Yeah.
Like I said,
So when we talk collaborative stuff, we have combined collaboratively traditional worship opportunities. We have not combined what we might call alternative worship opportunities, contemporary. There's baggage around all of these words. And so, but that 11 o'clock or 10:30 at Wood Lake timeframe has not been a group or a place where we have sort of made that the primary sort of way that we've done worship when we've gathered together. And so that has been a challenge because for people for whom that is their preferred style of worship or their connection with God, their connection to worship, there's some sense of when will our preference be lifted up. Yeah, all the way in the back.
What if we were to change worship hours or times to coincide with each other? Would that help with collaborating?
That is a great question. So Diane's lifting up this question of worship time. We're half an hour off from the people down the street from us. So what would it look like if we aligned our worship services on a weekly basis to whatever the time would be, right? But so that on each Sunday, these, whatever the service, the traditional worship service happens at the same time in both places. The contemporary, alternative, coffee house, whatever we want to call it, happens in the same time.
I see the challenge with that though is who's gonna change?
That's a great question, right?
We go to 10 o'clock and they come to 9:30, and how is that? That's the challenge.
Right, the challenge of who's gonna change, that is a huge question as we talk about what does it mean to be church in the future, right? Because we recognize there are times when we don't want to adjust things, right? There are things that are important to us for important reasons. And there are things that are important to other people for important reasons. And if we're gonna do stuff together, how do we work through some of that? Pastor Corla.
Sort of a parallel to the notes about Rosalind and the ways that we learned from that sharing of a staff position for worship. I think we have had a couple of challenges come up around how non-shared staff roles that do a little bit of stuff with collaboration but aren't technically employed by both churches. Those boundaries have been a little flimsy sometimes, and so that has been a challenge that we want to address.
The challenge of non-shared staff members, what does that look like? Also, I will add to that the challenge of part-time staff members in both places. Part-time ministry positions are some of the hardest things to navigate in the entire world. Give me an obstacle course on a Marine base any day, and it will be easier to navigate than part-time ministry because there is such a heart for what we do in the life, particularly of the church, that, if you tell somebody you've got 20 hours a week to get this done, and they go, well, but it's so important, I'll put a few extra hours in, right? Or, oh, but this is so important, we expect you to be able to put these hours in, and you go, well, no, because I've got 20 hours, and now I have to spend some of the rest of that time doing something else. So it's a challenge to be able to maintain those boundaries well, but it's also for a staff member who is, primarily tasked with what goes on at House of Prayer within the ministry of House of Prayer, what does that mean for collaborative ministry? Other challenges that, Wayne?
Well, the biggest issue, I think, when we ever began the discussion of collaboration was all three churches wanted it to end up at their church. And that's not gonna happen, I don't think. Well, it might, but when I look at our deficit, it's not feasible that we're gonna be financially gonna sustain this very much longer. And Oak Grove hasn't been much part of it at all.
Yeah.
I've been, in contrary to my boss's comments, I'm very comfortable worshiping at Wood Lake, and as long as I see all these people here.
Yeah. Well, the good news, Wayne, is you're two different people, so you're allowed to have two different opinions. I don't know if anyone's told you that up until this point, and it might have just ruined Gretchen's whole but yeah,
He's always right.
Wayne's lifting up that, when collaboration started, so what, 10 years ago, it started as a conversation with the three Richfield congregations. Oak Grove was a big part of that, right? And Oak Grove has not been as involved with some of the collaborative stuff, particularly in the last couple of years that House of Prayer and Wood Lake have dove into. We have invited Oak Grove repeatedly to become part of Rally and be engaged in that way. There have been varying reasons why they've said no as they go through a pastoral transition. They have said, you know, as the new pastor comes on, this is something we want to continue to be in conversation about, but they're not making any commitment to that. But there's a question there, and the challenge that Wayne lifted up at the end of that is, you know, there's some realities that I would say all churches, particularly mainline Protestant churches, but also I would say houses of faith and just churches kind of generically across the United States are facing. There's some trends that many of you are probably aware of. Some of those trends start way further back than anyone really wants to admit. Retired Bishop Michael Gerlinghouse, in a book that you'll see me reference in our annual report, comments that the decline of congregations in the ELCA, but kind of overall, started in the 1960s. And most ELCA congregations in particular, but also mainline Protestant churches, sort of ignored that decline until at least the 90s and maybe into 2000 before we really started to see the decline of membership. But he said the decline in churches also mirrors the decline in membership organizations, so bowling clubs, Elks groups, VFW, all of that sort of stuff, hit its peak in the mid-60s and has been on its way down. And if you do sort of generational study and understanding, one of the things that is particular to millennials and younger is there is a distrust of institutions. Is one of the kind of markers that gets talked about, and there's various reasons for that, but it makes it challenging as an institution, and the church is part of an institution, to simply say, oh, well, of course you're going to come and be part of us because that's what people do. And when generations as a whole say, no, we don't just join institutions because they exist, we have more of a vetting process involved. We have more conversation that goes on, more discernment that we're doing before we commit ourselves to an organization. And so that changes some of those statistics around us. But yeah, to the point of one of the challenges is how do we engage our other collaborative partners? Dick?
When I was young, which is a few years ago, we were 1963 state football champions in Michigan. A lot of the great athletes were in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
Now, another issue is a request for the new pope, but there is a big shortage of priests.
Yeah.
If they're heading the base.
Yeah.
How they deal with it, I don't know.
Yeah, so one of the challenges that Dick's lifting up, so, you know, in the 60s, lots of the people that Dick knew, the athletes, members over at Oak Grove, it was just sort of a connection point. Now as we move into today, you know, people are excited, there's a new pope, right? There's energy around that. Even though we as Lutherans don't, you know, fall under the auspices of the pope, we certainly feel that sort of world leader presence. And what does that mean? Lutheran-Catholic relationships is a whole thing. Catholic Church is facing a shortage of priests. The Lutheran Church is honestly facing a shortage of pastors. You wouldn't know it in the Twin Cities area because we have 2 pastors for every opening in the synod. Part of that is because some of us are stubborn and don't want to leave. You know, there's various reasons for that, but there's also, you know, a lot more Lutheran congregations in this area, so opportunity to move from, you know, one congregation to another is a little greater. But if you go to places like North Dakota or Tennessee, they are just really asking for pastors to come and be part of their congregations and in leadership. And our seminaries are seeing record low enrollment and are asking the question for themselves, what does longevity look like, and how much longer can we continue to do this, and what does collaboration look like in the world of the seminary? I went to PLTS where collaboration was already happening with 17 theological schools. They've since actually dropped out of that graduate theological union for various reasons. And so it's sort of that ongoing question of what does it look like? Who are we in the sandbox with? Elaine?
I talked to Pastor Nate from the Richfield Methodist Church, the one that's opposite Bachman's. And he says, your pastors will have to go where the crowd goes. And he has showed me pictures of where he has gone into pubs and has a religious moment right there in the pub with the drinkers, whether they're having a beer or a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. But go where the people are.
So the challenge is to find where are the people who are receptive to that message, right? This is part of what goes on in the gospel. It's part of what really starts to happen in the book of Acts. Where's Peter going? Where's Paul going? What are the stories? Where are the people gathered, right? We'll have a story, is it next week or in 2 weeks, from the book of Acts, where they are called to go, and so they go and they meet the women. Well, where are the women gathering in their prayer gathering? And we get introduced to Lydia because of it. To that question of, what is the challenge, and are we as a congregation going to support sending our pastors into pubs or coffee houses or pizza places or whatever it is, right? And I say that as a question because I think, well, not really a question, but stated in that way because we as a church support what we do as outreach. The other question is, what are all y'all, because there's 2 pastors in the room, right?
1.5.
1.5. We have a pastor and a part-time pastor. She's actually a full pastor, just only. How many of the rest of you are here who can go into those very same places, right? And do some of those things. And yes, the conversations are going to be different, but what does that look like, right? That's part of the challenge. That's, back to the sermon, right? If we're called to love one another in the world, what does it look like to get out there and do that? Elaine?
Sarah and Dave run a program the first Friday of the month as a game day at House of Prayer. I have been told by both of them that they have gone into pubs and they have as many as 20 or 30 people there to participate in the game days. Is this right?
We don't usually get 20 or 30. There are game meetups that do. But
And here at House
You
of
go
Prayer,
into the
we can get 2
bars.
people in the afternoon.
Yeah, so one of the challenges that you just named there, Elaine, is the activity can be the same in 2 different places, right? Game meetup at House of Prayer, game meetup at Frenchman's Pub, or Wild Grind Coffee Shop, or whatever the other location might be, right? And 2 people will come into the church for that activity, and 10 or 12 or 30 will show up at the pub or at the coffee shop for that activity. And so how do we get out there, right? What do we do? So that's a real challenge. Dick?
I coached and taught in China for 32 years, and I loved it. And one of the secretaries said, we're losing a great minister. He's at Normandale with the church. That was Pastor Chuck Carlson.
Yep.
He came here,
Mm-hmm.
and he was amazing. And I know he conducted the service for my mother, pastor. But he's retired.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember people in the office talking about that. What are they doing? We're moving this wonderful ministry. That's for sure.
Yep. So we've had some great pastors in the past. Hopefully we have some, fair to Midland pastors now.
Someday.
We have half of a great pastor right here. But yeah,
Sounds
that's
like
a
fun,
great
right?
question, right? What do we do with staff and some of that question? Carol?
I was thinking, we're challenged to go out and go where the people are, but a big challenge would be, once we get there, are we comfortable or are we strong enough in our faith to share it with somebody? That's the big, that would be a big challenge too. Not only going out to where they are, but sharing it, sharing what we believe and what we feel is important to us with other people. I think that could be a really big challenge for some people, and maybe that's why people don't do it. And I have to admit, that's my problem too. I would love to share it, but I'm always hesitant to do it.
Yeah, do we feel equipped to do the things that we're called to do? So in light of kind of an eye to time, and I know we're probably running way longer than anybody wants to, but this has been really rich and helpful, and I want to make sure we get to kind of two next pieces that are really important. One is the question of where is God leading us next? And so as a question to all y'all, which by the way, somebody asked me why I use y'all. Growing up in Minnesota and being back here now, the first time I ever visited Tennessee, I got connected with the word y'all, and then at that time I was working with a team of outside salespeople, one who lived in the Houston area, one who lived in Oklahoma City, and one who lived in Virginia. And y'all just stuck with me because I was like, it just makes so much sense. And then I lived in Tennessee for 7 years, split 2 different times, 3 years one time, 4 years the other. And y'all has just become part of who I am and what I do. I just take wherever I've been with me, and so there's a little bit of California and a little bit of Wisconsin, and so. But for all y'all, where is God leading us next? Where do you see, what are things that you see on the horizon? We've kind of raised some opportunity for further collaboration. Are there any radical ideas that are bubbling up that you're like, I'm just gonna go ahead and say this in a group of people and see if they'll throw tomatoes at me, or if they'll lift me up on their shoulders and carry me through the stadium? Or it can just be something small too.
All right, I'll go for the radical. I don't want to sit here for 20 minutes. We should build housing.
Okay.
And full stop. We should build low-income housing.
Build low-income housing.
And be serious about it, not just saying, oh, we're gonna put up a few little houses.
Are we talking high-rise?
Yeah.
All right. I just want to be clear on what our parameters are if you're saying.
I said.
Yep. So Sarah thinks
radical.
God is calling us into providing housing for people, and not on a small scale. Other ideas for where God is leading us, what might be next, or questions that you have about what might be next, maybe. Pastor Corla.
This is less concrete than building housing. Listening to what we have just been talking about, I heard the word invite or invitation more than almost any other word other than God and the core church words. So I wonder if God is inviting us into a season of invitation, right? And again, that's very, very broad, it is abstract, but to inviting one another into new things, right? I don't know what we are inviting folks into, and we might indeed be inviting one another into something, but it feels like God is calling us into a season that is led by invitation in a variety of shapes.
All right, so that idea of invitation, God's leading us into inviting things. Andre.
I believe God is leading us to provide a center for the needs of this community that is inclusive and authentic and empowering for us.
Inclusive, authentic, and empowering space for youth in our community.
All youth.
All youth. Not just Lutheran youth, not just Christian youth, but all youth. An inviting space. I think, those 3 words were critical. Inclusive, empowering, and authentic. space for youth. David?
When we first moved into this community in mid-1960s and joined House of Prayer, this community was a relatively young community, essentially white community, a lot of Lutherans, with 3 Lutheran churches in the Ridgefield community, 3 prospering Lutheran churches, ELCA Lutheran churches. And over time, this community has changed. And you can look at the demographics of the community, it's changed, and predominantly, they're not Lutheran. And so the age of this congregation has obviously increased the average age. And it's not sustainable. We don't have the population that we can be a magnet for. So I think that the collaboration that has been initiated, I think that's a great idea. I'm encouraged, particularly being part of the music program here at House of Prayer, and remembering what the choirs and what the other music organizations were like early on. Now there's just two men in the choir now, Wayne is in the bass section, and I constitute the tenor section. and that's not sustainable over time. We have really established some great relationships, I think, with the Wood Lake folks, and I want that to continue. But I don't think that this is sustainable in this building, with this congregation, with these numbers. So I want us to move beyond that. I don't have any plans or great perceptions as to how that's going to look, but I think that we spin our wheels if we try to move this along and stay where we are.
So I'm going to try to summarize what you're saying there. And
I haven't said it all.
Well, keep going. Do you want the pulpit next Sunday too? So David's point, right? 1965, mid-60s, this was a different community. In fact, Ridgefield had more people in the 60s and 70s than it does today as an overall population. So we're seeing, different neighbors around us. To your point, many of our neighbors are not connected to the Lutheran Church. Some of them probably don't even know what a Lutheran is. And they appreciate having a church on the corner, but don't see themselves connecting. And so we see ourselves aging as a congregation because our neighbors are not the ones coming in. And there's that question of, why would I drive by 12 other Lutheran churches on the way to this one, right? And so lifting up the question of sustainability, appreciating the collaborative things, particularly the choir, but encouraging us to move beyond spinning our wheels, navel gazing as it might be, and what is the next thing that so I hear from you energy toward having further conversation into what is next as far as being sustainable, continuing to do more stuff together. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah, I think recognizing that we're not sustainable and then moving on.
Yeah, so naming in that our current reality is not sustainable as it is, at least for a long term. So, thank you, yeah. I see a bunch of hands here, so, Paul.
I have to say, one is the evaluation of the physical plant needs, spending, future. I know ours, we've had a lot of deferred maintenance over the years, working on it, but what's the other one? I have no idea. And I think, we all have our sentimental favorites, but, at the end of the day, if one is $1.5 million less than another, you gotta give that some logical consideration.
Yeah, so as we talk about collaboration, we know kind of what some of the realities are here. How do we share the realities of what's happening at Wood Lake or at Oak Grove? Some of those pieces, and then taking sort of a serious look at, if we're not sustainable in this space as we are, what is sustainable into the future? And a question to that kind of point, right, is we have the things that are important, that we're familiar with. But just because we're familiar with them, does that make them the best option? And so how do we kind of take a step back and evaluate that, or invite someone into the conversation maybe who can bring an outside perspective and say, well, when you look at physical plant between House of Prayer, Wood Lake, maybe Oak Grove, what does that look like? And then the question, I think, that partly overarches some of that, and I think you allude to there, Paul, is, from a missional perspective, back to some of these questions up above, right? If we're supposed to provide space for youth that's inclusive, inviting, and empowering, which space does the best job of doing that, right? I think we've heard enough, not enough. We've heard a lot of conversation about the importance of music and worship, and I think we would be remiss to not say that music and worship are a core value. In fact, we talk about that as one of our missional points of nurturing the gift of music at House of Prayer. And so if we made decisions going forward that ruled out music, I would assume that an awful lot of the people in this room would go, that's not the church that I've been a part of, right? So if we separate ourselves from the building and we talk about sort of those heartbeat things of who we are, relationships, welcoming, opportunities, right? All of that sort of stuff. Where is the core of that in leading us into some of those questions? I saw a hand going, Wayne's hand. Yeah, you.
Well, it's obvious we're not financially, we got a $278,000 plus deficit going into the year. It still shocks me that we voted not to sell this building to Seventh-day Adventists and then rent back from them. If we had a lot of money, we could have sustained this building too. But I'm okay with wherever we end up in a building. I want this people around me.
Yeah, so as we talk about where is God leading us, relationships with this group of people is important to Wayne. Brent?
I just wanted to add, I think that we should include the word service, including service that might be somebody else's idea, which I think was kind of a testimony to what Pastor Corl was saying earlier. So service, where God's leading us, it's a service, and including things that maybe we didn't think of, maybe somebody else's service that we can participate in.
Yeah, so as service, and by service, are you saying like outreach opportunities, serving our neighbor, that sort of thing, but not just ideas that we've carried from here? What are other people inviting us into? So open to those collaborative opportunities that draw us beyond ourselves, maybe is one way of asking it. Dick?
When I was in high school, all the churches played against each other in church basketball. And it was so much fun. We had baskets in here, and we shoot. And we still see each other years later. We laugh about how much fun we had. So there was a basket there. There was a basket there. And it was fun. And we stayed in touch with the church.
Yeah, so opportunities, thinking about so the core of that opportunity, right? Playing basketball maybe isn't the thing that will draw people today, but the core of the idea was, what do we do together with people at other congregations that we will remember 10, 15, 20 years, 40, 50, 80 years from now?
Yeah, I remember we would play Wood Lake.
Yeah?
Did we win?
Were there any trophies involved?
Now it's pizza.
Oh,
And it's now different restaurant,
yeah.
but it was just fun.
Yeah, those are the things, right? When we talk about sort of the relational piece, right? The things that draw us together, the things that are fun and whatever it might be. So As we think about where God is leading us with this crowd in mind, I would be interested to hear, are there specific collaborative ideas that you would say there's some energy toward? I'm hearing sort of some vague conversation that leads us in the direction, like, of course, we're gonna continue the collaborative stuff that we're doing with Wood Lake. Is that sort of does that feel like a pulse of, I mean, you don't have to like vote and put your stamp on it, but I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads, yes. Okay. Is there a limit to what collaboration with Wood Lake in specific might look like? To anybody?
Define limit. What do you mean by limit?
Well, that's part of my question. Is there some point at which we would say, here's a collaborative idea that we're just not ready for? Or, wow, that would be nutty. Sarah?
I'll give you an example that maybe is a line, which is, we give up our sanctuary 100% of the time. That's a line that maybe some people, maybe not in this room, but some people might say, no, I don't want to give it up 100% of the time.
Okay. Other sort of lines, limits, thoughts, ideas?
Murder. I came from a church I grew up in that survived since I was 20. It's quite a while. And so
A week or two.
yeah, a minute, but, so yeah, I mean, it can work. And is that the inevitable thing? I mean, you need to decide, do you need to rip off the Band-Aid and just go for it? Or does it need to be 10 years till we work toward it? I mean, that's the kind of thing I would look at, that we need to give some collective thought to.
Yeah, so there's some language out there, whether it's collaboration that leads toward merger, consolidation, unification, what are some of the other words that we can throw out there? This idea of like sort of two entities becoming one entity, and what does that look like? And how much time might that take? And what does that look like from a perspective of, we're not probably ready yet to say, oh, we're all gonna move across town and start worshiping in another building. What might be some of the next steps to think through that a little bit? So that's sort of where is God leading us into wondering, maybe, is a sort of a piece. David?
Yeah, I think that, just to, I don't want to go over what I just said, but I think that the writing is on the wall. So I think that we're looking towards a merger. I'm looking towards a merger, a consolidation of some kind. And that's that's where I think the energy should be. Otherwise, we're spinning our wheels. So I think we have to move forward.
So I'm hearing some murmuring to this idea of this being inevitable. So without, again, like taking a vote, but if you want to like bob your head one direction or another, or put a hand in the air, or at least a finger, choose the finger you want. I've seen it all at this point. I drive on 494 every day. And now that there's a construction zone, it's a whole other thing. But to that question, it sounds like David's saying, like, instead of just spinning our wheels and talking in sort of vagaries, like, what would it look like to make some consistent conversation in that direction, recognizing we're not going to make any decision today, we're not going to make any decision at our next congregational meeting, which is June 17th, by the way, for those of you holding on to calendars and needing to put another date on it. But having intentional conversation in that direction sounds like what you're inviting us into. Kara, you've popped your hand up and down a couple of times over here. I haven't tried to ignore you, but it keeps going down, so.
Well, I think we need to be open to trying new and different things, and we might try a whole bunch of things on this path, and, you know, maybe a thing we try isn't the thing that's always gonna work. But I feel like maybe we should always be worshiping together. Maybe we should try that and see what that looks like. Maybe we should be trying to, you know, take a realistic look at both of our buildings and do some kind of feasibility study for, you know, what do each of the two buildings look like? What would be the reasons to choose one over the other? What are some very, you know, specific things that we can do that move us forward? Because people, I'm sorry, but we really do have to make some hard decisions, and we have to do it not over the next 10 years, not over the next 5 years, not over the next 3 years, probably. We have to start trying some new things now.
And also from, you know, leadership committee, we need more than just the leadership committee to help us, please, right?
Yeah.
Over time.
Beth, I saw a hand.
I just need to throw this out there because I moved here 5 years ago, and I checked into like 20 churches to decide where was I gonna go, and before that, I had been in 2 churches in my life. And when I came here, I was very happy and I really liked it, but I also realized it's not the building. Yes. It's the people who are here, it's who you wanna be with, it's serving and loving God, that's the most important thing, not how big is the building and how bad are we pushing.
Yeah. So yeah, as one of the newer faces, sounds like most of you heard what Beth had to say, so I will not repeat overly, but yeah, as one of the newer faces, recognizing it's about the people, and that's why after searching 20 congregations, Beth chose House of Prayer. Yeah, I think anyone who has done the church shopping piece can, I think, attest to, you know, in many ways, it's not so much about, you know, what fits perfect, but where do I just feel like God is calling me? Where is God connecting me with people? And I'm sure many of you have those kinds of stories as you think about even kind of settling into this space. I think speaking to some of those reality pieces, and again, trying to not keep you here all day, because I can see the sun is shining, even if the temperature is not going to rise too much. But just as kind of a quick word about the budget that you see on the table in front of you, this is your first glance at the budget that will likely be presented in this format without a whole lot of change, would be my best guess. At the annual meeting on June 17th, we'll have the annual report out next Sunday, is that right?
Yes.
So we've been working feverishly on getting this. Cara has put hour after hour after hour into this budget. Tweaked it a couple of different times. I think sort of to highlight some of the biggest pieces of it, what's probably notable, and most of you went right to the bottom line. I know Wayne did. A couple of the rest of you probably also did go to the bottom line. But before we get there is just looking at sort of the revenue piece, recognizing that we have had a revenue decline over the past couple of years. We've tracked that pretty closely. As we look at last budget year, the 24-25 budget year, we had projected a 5% decline between the previous budget year to last year. We're actually seeing a little closer to 8%. So we're taking that as we kind of carry forward into next year and projecting about a 9% decline between what was budgeted for 24-25 and what we are budgeting for 25-26. We think that's fairly consistent. In a large sense, a number of that decline is coming from people who have been faithful members of this congregation who have died. And we recognize that that's sort of the reality in which we exist. I was talking to a colleague at one of the largest congregations in the ELCA out in Colorado, He said, for each person in your congregation over the age of 70 who stops giving to your congregation, usually because of death, he said it will take you 7 people under the age of 45 to get that money back. That is a huge turnaround, isn't it? It's a reality of what does philanthropic giving look like in the United States right now, particularly to ministry organizations. And so, you know, as we look around and kind of think through some of those numbers, we need to multiply every death by 7 in order to maintain an even keel. And as you can tell from looking around, it's not something we've been doing. Rental income has been the other thing that has really hit us. We had projected for the idea that Southview might move out of our building, although I would say from a leadership perspective, we sort of floated with this idea that they were really never gonna find a building that they were gonna be satisfied with, and they would continue to be our rental partner until such time that we decided that we were ready to sell our building to them. But as you all know, they did decide that the former Easter Lutheran in Egan facility was going to be close enough to what they needed, that they moved into that facility. That's a significant rental drop. We've had 1 or 2 of our other smaller congregations that have moved out of the building as well. They've had financial challenges on their own, stability challenges. And because of that, we have a pretty precipitous drop in rental income. We have tried to have conversation around what would the next renter in the space look like. Cara has had many conversations with organizations. The reality is that what most organizations are willing to pay for space compared to what we would normally rent space for as sort of a market value for a church, which is under market value for a commercial property. But for what we offer, there's just too big of a gap between what they're able to pay and what we would ask for. And even if we're willing to bring our portion of that down considerably, we've had some organizations where it just simply would be, we would be supporting them and paying for them to be in our building, which is not something that would be sustainable for us at this point. And so, you know, we continue to have conversation and kind of invite opportunities for different rental partners, but then there's also sort of the back and forth of, for each rental that comes into the building, there's staff hour and staff time that is needed for that. And so the long-term rentals are helpful and good. The short-term rentals are challenging because we need staff present in the building. Or if volunteers want to be present in the building while a renter is here, that's certainly an option. But often those one-off rentals for the little bit of money that comes in, it ends up being a lot of time and energy. And so we continue to be open to the idea of potentially a preschool or a, you know, if it were a charter school could be an option. Those are some of the kind of longer term rentals that seem to serve better. But those organizations just don't seem to have the budget that makes sense. And so it's one of the realities that we've bumped up against. The other thing is you go down to some of those costs. You will notice that there are some costs that go up considerably. One of them is an HR cost. In order to keep good staff, you need to continue to pay them well. And so we have proposed from the LMT a 6% cost of living adjustment for most of our staff. There's a few sort of other adjustments that happen. So like with our maintenance staff, we're bumping them up to a dollar amount rather than as a percentage, just to get them sort of in a competitive wage area. But that's what you see there. Insurance is the other place that, if you're not aware, on December 1st, we received a letter from Church Mutual that said, we are no longer going to insure your building. And so Cara scrambled with Scott's help and anybody who would listen to us, basically, where can we get insurance? And we tried several places, and Cara generated reams and reams of paper that got scanned and sent here, there, and everywhere. We thankfully found an insurance agent who would be able to provide for us property and liability insurance, but that was it doubled the cost of what we were paying before. Part of the reality to that is that Church Mutual, as we sort of heard from some people, was functionally undercharging, and that's where they sort of got themselves into some trouble. We are not the only church they've dropped. Church Mutual has dropped tons of churches. Pretty much if your building is more than 20 years old and the roof is more than probably 10 years old, Church Mutual has put you on the outside at this point. And so that's an increase in cost there. The increase in health insurance costs for non-clergy staff was up 17% this year. We anticipate that probably the portico cost for health insurance will be somewhere between 10 to that same 17%. Portico tries really hard on behalf of churches, small and large, to keep those increases as small as possible. They encourage pastors to use their insurance wisely in order to keep costs down, because as the ELCA benefits arm, Portico essentially self-insures. So the money we pay in is exactly the money that's getting spent back out on those benefits, and so we impact that directly. But the reality is health costs are skyrocketing and they keep going up, and so those percentages continue to go up as well. And so where you look at that bottom line and you see the 278,190, which gets offset by plans to spend some dedicated funds, so some of that money kind of coming out from some very specific places to help spend down some of our savings. Please know that that number actually started out about 50,000 higher than that, which largely we adjusted how we anticipate moving forward with a music position to replace Roseland, and so our projection at this point is a 25-hour-a-week position that would be shared with Wood Lake to oversee a worship service. Ideally, it would work awesome if that worship service were one traditional service that could alternate between our buildings, and what that exactly looks like, we're not sure. But it would be overseeing a joint choir, a joint handbell, so as you think about liturgical worship, one person who would oversee liturgical worship for both congregations, and both congregations would do that together. And then in that, we would likely figure out what does it look like to do alternative worship, coffee house worship together as well. And so if we were to pursue that direction, it would be with tons of communication around how are we going to implement that, so that we're sure people are showing up at the right place at the right time to all of those kinds of questions. But that's one of the places where we can impact budget fairly directly. We know that we could also make some impact in other shared staffing positions. But the reality of that big number, as Wayne pointed out and David pointed out, and many of you have probably rolled around in your head, is it's not long-term sustainable. That's about the amount of money that we have in dedicated funds and in just sort of a general surplus account at this point. So we have 12 months in which to spend money down before we have to ask the question of where are we getting money now, and that could be drawing on funds from the foundation, if the foundation were open to that sort of a maneuver, and it would take a vote of the congregation to make that possible. If that means a reverse mortgage against the building, if that means somebody selling their $1 million yacht that we still haven't heard about, but they're just hiding, on a seaport somewhere far, far away. I don't think that's the case here, but you just never know whose uncle might, die in Africa and leave somebody an awful lot of money. And if you want to provide that, why, we would be happy. But that's the kind of the picture financially of where things are at. Questions on that? And I know this is your first glance at seeing those numbers, so over the next couple of weeks, if you process those numbers and have questions, Cara will be on vacation for a good chunk of time. So get to her this week. Or we'll just stack up a list of things and be like, all right, here's the 27 questions you now need to ask. But please reach out with those questions. We will help you get answers. We will help explain things as best we can. Yeah, Chuck.
People were really thought about merging together, that's one.
Yeah, that's a great question, Chuck. So Chuck's question is, has House of Prayer and Woodlake, have we thought about merging together as one? So I think the answer to that is our leadership teams have definitely been meeting and talking about collaboration. We've done kind of the same exercise. What has been good and exciting? What have been some of the challenges? And where do we see God leading us next? I think it's fair to say that our leadership teams are encouraged by that kind of conversation, and that it would be fair to say we recognize that there are a lot of questions we don't know the answer to in that direction, but we are open to asking those questions and getting those answers in a short course. And so what that might look like is task teams or study groups, yeah, or some of the other, we threw out a bunch of different words, right? Because words can get in the way sometimes, right? Mission panels, yep. Because part of what we recognize, this question, where is God leading us? That's ultimately what's driving what we're doing here, right? Then some of you have already talked to that very point, right? We are here because of what God is doing in our lives. We are here because of the relationships that God has empowered us with, that who we've been encouraged by. And so we want to recognize that and keep that at the center of what we do. What we do moving forward is not about sustaining a specific seat in a specific pew, right? We can move into a different seat, probably. We can change the angle at which we do some stuff. But what's important to us are those core values, right? Relationships, welcome, openness, compassion, right? What's important to us is recognizing that we are a congregation that feeds people so that both, how was it that you put it, Joe?
We feed people so inwardly fed to outwardly feed.
Yeah, inwardly fed to outwardly feed.
That was brilliant.
Yeah, it was a great, it was perfect. That's why I wrote it down. We put it into print, and clearly we don't read it often enough. So we need to return to that, right? But it's a part of who we are and what we do. And so as we talk about those pieces, right, to be about feeding, right? It's not just about having a meal, but it's about being inwardly fed to outwardly feed, right? And what does that look like? Spiritual, physical, all of those things. Nurturing the gift of music, right? Continuing to be people about compassion, recognizing that God is not done with us yet and that there's more to the story. I could keep talking for a really long time. I should probably stop now. Other questions, comments, things that for the good of the group feel like they would be appropriate now? Pastor Corla.
Will God be with us in this process?
All right, people,
it's a big process.
People of God, will God be with us in this process?
Yes. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, that's an important question. And I think the way you all answered that was an important answer. Because as we go forward, and I can't remember who it was who said, but that's God right now. Sarah was the one who said, It needs all of us, right? What is your next faithful step? And so that's the question I want to leave you with. You don't have to answer it on your Post-it notes right now. I mean, you can, but I take seriously the question, where am I going to plug in this process? Will I be part of a task team? Will I be part of providing feedback somewhere? Will I provide a meal for something that happens so that we can gather people together? I mean, it could just be cookies for that matter, and we'll probably all be more than content half the time, right? But each of us has something we can plug in. And if the something that you can plug in is praying for this process as we go forward, that is huge. And I would hope that, quite honestly, each and every person in this room would do that without even thinking about it. But I think it's valid to name that as something that we need to do as we move forward. And so I'm going to encourage us in this time, as we've been sitting way too long, or most of you have, I've been standing. But I'm going to invite us just into a time of prayer. So let us pray. God, we give you thanks for this conversation, for all of the feedback that we have heard. Thank you for your Holy Spirit moving through this space and in our lives. And as we continue forward, God, we don't necessarily know what the answers are, but we trust, God, that you are holding on, that you are revealing those pieces to us, so that as we ask the questions, open our hearts and minds to the way that you will speak to us. Open us to how we can be a part of this process. Open us to being energized for a new thing in a new day. Help us to also name the places of pain and of grief that come with this process. Help us to name the things that are challenging. Help us to be truthful with the people around us that we know we can trust, the ones who will support us. Help us to just be ourselves, to be your children. Thank you for leading us from this place to live and to love and to share your love with all that we encounter. In Jesus' name we pray. Together, all God's people say, Amen. Thank you all for enduring a very long conversation and a longer than probably anticipated morning. If more things come up, if you've got Post-its that you want to send this way, do it. And then God be with you until we meet again.
And then if Shelley Stafford, Sarah Barnaby, and Karen Steenson, you have flowers upstairs. Thank you.